Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into this week's edition of my top starts and sits for week 15 of this NFL season. If you guys are watching this video, congratulations on making the playoffs. Maybe you're in a league that doesn't start the playoffs for another week. So I do wish you guys the best of luck if you guys do have a late playoff start. And as well, a reminder, these starts and sits, they don't just apply to season long leagues. If you guys been following along with me all year, maybe you missed the playoffs, keep in mind you can consider my starts and sits for daily lineups on the weekend so you can keep on rolling and playing fantasy football. And you can do what I do is I take these starts and sits and I apply them when I bet overs and unders, and I hit on a little under parlay this past weekend from last week's sits section. So yeah, be all one last thing though. I do want to remind myself to say this, and remind you guys as well. One of my biggest rules that I personally follow once I reach the playoffs is I am a firm believer in playing the players that got you there, even if they have a tough matchup. Even if I suggest sitting them this week, if you don't have a better option to turn to, and in your mind you believe that player helped you get to the playoffs, I always believe in playing those players because nothing is worse than you decide that you're going to sit that player that got you to the playoffs just because he has a tough matchup and then he ends up balling out. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the quarterbacks as I always start with. My top start of the week, I'm going to go with that rookie quarterback for New York, Jackson Dart against the Commanders. Commanders have allowed the fourth most points per game against the quarterback position. In their last four games, Washington has allowed two different quarterbacks to throw over 320 passing yards against them. Now, do I think Dart's going to reach 300 passing yards? Not likely. I mean, maybe he does because I know they want to pull back his rushing ability to keep him healthy. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a mixture of running and passing for Dart that ends up leading to a positive day from him. In those four games, they allowed 7 passing touchdowns, so not quite the 2 touchdowns I always seek for my top starts. But I'm actually leaning into the fact that JJ McCarthy had a 3 passing touchdown game against them last week, so I'm looking for Dart to have just as good of a successful day as JJ McCarthy did against that defense. My other start I like Brock Purdy against the Titans. Titans have allowed the 8th most points per game against quarterbacks this season. When you look at the last 4 games from the Titans, all 4 quarterbacks that they faced threw for at least 225 passing yards, and they also gave up 8 passing touchdowns in those 4 games. So I am looking for Purdy to get around 220 to 230 passing yards and 2+ touchdowns against this bad Titans defense on Sunday. Now, my top sit of the week, maybe this is a quarterback that got you to the playoffs. And like I said at the beginning of this video, play the players that got you there. So if you're a believer that Prescott pulled you to the playoffs, leave him in your lineup, but do temper your expectations that this might be a floor performance from Dak on Sunday night. The reason why he's facing a Minnesota defense that has allowed the 3rd fewest points per game against quarterbacks this year. When you look at the last 4 games from Minnesota, not one quarterback finished over 195 passing yards against them. And surprisingly, the Vikings have not given up a single passing touchdown in their last 4 games. Now, do I think Dak's probably going to break that drought? Probably. But if he doesn't get you the yards, you got to hope that he's going to get you at least a pair of touchdowns to give you a floor performance this weekend. My other sit, I am going to go with Caleb Williams against the Browns. Browns are tied for the 4th fewest allowed points per game against quarterbacks this season. When you look at the last 4 games from the Cleveland defense, only one quarterback threw over 195 passing yards against them. And in those 4 games, they've only given up 4 passing touchdowns. So if I was maybe streaming Caleb Williams this season when the matchup is right, it's not right this week. I would rather go get a Brock Purdy or a Jackson Dart over Caleb Williams in week 15. Moving into my top starts and sits at the running back spot, my top start of the week is going to be Travis Etienne Jr. against the Jets. If you play daily lineups, you can maybe consider Bayshal Tutin in your daily lineups because he'll be a cheaper option than ETN. But I'm looking for ETN Jr. to have a monster day against this bad Jets defense. The Jets have allowed the third fewest points per game against running backs this season. When you look at the last 4 games from New York, in those 4 games, they allowed 5 different running backs to finish over 85 total yards against them. And they've also given up 10 running back touchdowns. So I'm looking for ETN to get around 80 to 100 total yards and ideally 2 touchdowns for you and to have a big ceiling day against New York. My other start, I like the rookie running back for Houston, Woody Marks against the Cardinals. Cardinals have allowed the 4th most allowed points per game against running backs this year. In their last 4 games, they have allowed 5 different running backs to finish over 80 total yards against them. And they've also given up 8 running back touchdowns. I know Chubb's going to get some touches in there as well, so maybe you could put Chubb as a cheaper option in your daily lineups. But I am looking for Marks to get flirt around 80 total yards in this game and at least get 1 touchdown on Sunday. My sits. Now, Kieran Williams, he might be a player that got you to the playoffs. So like I've been kind of reiterating throughout this video, if you believe Williams got you to the playoffs, leave him in your lineup, but just understand he might have a floor performance this weekend. Williams draws a tough matchup against Detroit, who have allowed the 2nd fewest points per game against the running back position this season. Now, in their last 4 games, there have been 2 running backs that reached 83 rushing yards. That was Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley. Obviously, those guys are arguably a top 5, top 8 running backs in the league. So I don't know if I include Kieran Williams in that category, so I have a tough time believing that Kieran Williams is going to reach 80 rushing yards against them. But even though they've given up those 83 rushing yards to those 2 running backs in their last 4 games, they've only given up 1 running back touchdown. So it does feel like if you play Williams, maybe you can get the yardage production from him, but I don't know if he's going to be able to find the end zone for you this weekend. My other sit, I don't like David Montgomery against the Rams. If there's going to be a running back that has a good game against the Los Angeles Rams defense this weekend, it's going to be Jahmyr Gibbs, right? David Montgomery, he's a matchup-based play at this point for fantasy football, and he draws a tough matchup this weekend. Going against a Rams defense that have allowed the 3rd fewest points per game against running backs this season. When you look at their last 4 games, only 1 running back finished over 70 rushing yards against them. And if it's going to be a running back that does cross the 70 yards, it's likely going to be Gibbs over Montgomery. And they've only given up 2 running back touchdowns in their last 4 games. So it does feel like if you have to play Montgomery this weekend, it's going to be a touchdown or bust day for him in week 15. Moving into my top starts and sits at the wide receiver position, I can't believe I have this name listed as a start because Justin Jefferson, a long time ago, entered in the category of players I don't need to tell you to start. But he is having such a bad year because of the whole quarterback experience with J.J. McCarthy and Carson Wentz and Max Brosmer, that you do have to question if you should put him in your lineup, and he's not a player that got you to the playoffs. But if you spent that high draft capital on him, he's been letting you down, I think this might be a game where Jefferson can help you win your first round in the playoffs. I like Justin Jefferson as well as his counterpart Jordan Addison against the Cowboys. Cowboys have allowed the most points per game against wide receivers this season. When you look at the last 5 games from the Dallas defense, 5 different wide receivers finished over 85 receiving yards against them, and they've also given up 6 wide receiver touchdowns. My other start, he's going to be playing in the game tomorrow night, so if you do have him, you would want to make sure you get him into your lineup before tomorrow night's game kicks off. I like Emeka Egbuka against the Falcons. Now, I know the rookie wide receiver has really kind of hit a rookie wall over the past month, but I think we got some positive news today that's going to help Egbuka get back to what we saw in the first half of the season. Mike Evans is expected to play tomorrow night, as well as Jalen McMillan, the other wide receiver in their wide receiver room, who has missed, I think, every game this year because of an injury in the preseason. What that means is Ibuka, ever since that Evans has been out and Godwin's kind of been in and out of the lineup, he's kind of been more having to play on the boundary. When he was having a lot of his success earlier in the year, especially when Mike Evans was healthy, he was playing more in the slot, and he's very effective as a pass catcher, as a slot wide receiver. So with Evans coming back tomorrow night, I think that's going to benefit Igbukba. I just had a Gronkowski moment. Egbuka. I could get two in a row. With that being said, I think Evans' presence is going to slide him back in the slot where he can repeat that success. Could you maybe ask, like, hey, wouldn't Evans maybe take away targets? Sure, but keep in mind this is Evans' first game back from his injury. Is he going to be taking on his normal snap count? That's something that is up in the air as we enter tomorrow. With that being said, he has a great matchup against the Falcons, who have allowed the ninth most points per game against wide receivers this season. When you look at the last 4 games from the Atlanta defense, 5 different wide receivers finished over 80 receiving yards against them, and they've also given up 7 wide receiver touchdowns in those games as well. Moving to my sits, I don't necessarily love Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy against the Chargers defense. Chargers have allowed the fewest points per game against wide receivers this season. When you look at their last 4 games, only one wide receiver finished over 65 receiving yards against them, and they've also only given up 2 wide receiver touchdowns in those games. And not only they have a tough matchup on paper, I'm also factoring in that Patrick Mahomes is just struggling because of his injured offensive line. And that offensive line, unless it magically gets better, because a lot of their guys have been placed on IR, they're done for the next 3 games at minimum. He's probably going to be running around, and it's going to throw off his timing with his wide receivers. So if you have a better option to consider over Rice or Worthy, I would definitely be doing that. Another sit I don't like, even though Watson's been playing great since his return from his injury, I also don't like Christian Watson and Jaden Reed against that Broncos defense this weekend. Obviously, you have the Pat Surtain Jr. factor. I think Surtain would likely be lining up on Christian Watson most of the time in this matchup. Obviously, Surtain is a type of cornerback that can completely eliminate Watson's impact on the passing attack for the Packers. But then when you look at this matchup as a whole, Denver's allowed the second fewest points per game against wide receivers this season. When you look at their last 4 games, only one wide receiver finished over 65 receiving yards against them. And in those 4 games, they've also only given up 3 wide receiver touchdowns. Moving into my top starts and sits at the tight end spot, I normally don't like to do this, suggest you to start 2 different tight ends from the same team. But if there's a week to do it, I think this is going to be the week. I like both Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews against this Bengals defense that has struggled against tight ends this season. Looking at this matchup on paper, they have allowed the most points per game against the tight end position. Now, keep in mind, the Bengals and Ravens just played 2 weeks ago on that Thanksgiving night matchup. In that matchup, Isaiah Likely had 5 receptions for 95 yards. Mark Andrews had 4 receptions for 47 yards. And then when you look at the last 4 games, which includes that matchup, 6 different tight ends. That's 6, not just, 4 or 3. 6 different tight ends over the last 4 games from the Cincinnati Bengals have finished with at least 40 receiving yards against them. And then what's crazy is the Bengals have given up 15 tight end touchdowns for the entire season. The next closest team is at 9 tight end touchdowns. That's 6 more than the closest team. So I'm looking for both those guys to have a big night and a must-win game for Baltimore. My other start, I like the rookie tight end with the pair with Jackson Dart, since I like Dart this week. Theo Johnson against the Commanders. Commanders have allowed the second most points per game against the tight end position. They are the team that has the 9 tight end touchdowns allowed throughout the entire season. In their last 4 games, they've allowed 3 different tight end touchdowns, and then they have also given up 3 different tight ends that finished over 45 receiving yards against them. So I'm looking for Theo Johnson to have anywhere between 40 to 60 receiving yards and ideally a touchdown in that matchup. Moving into my sits, if you guys have been following along over the last month, the Raiders defense in the sit section on tight ends has popped up multiple times, and just turns out to be true. Most of the time, you don't want to do it. So yeah, I wouldn't be looking to stream a Dallas Goedert against the Raiders this weekend. Raiders have allowed the third fewest points per game against tight ends this season. When you look at their last 4 games, only one tight end has finished over 30 receiving yards in those 4 games, and they've only given up one tight end touchdown in the last 4 games, and they've only given up 3 tight end touchdowns for the entire season. Now, is it because they have a special defense against the tight ends? No, I just think running backs and wide receivers get all the production against them. And something you factor in, this Raiders team's terrible, right? So most of the time, offenses put their team up anywhere between 14 to 21 plus points early in this game. So what happens the most of the time for these Raiders matchups is the opposing offenses end up running the ball more. So those tight ends really don't have a lot of opportunity to get points. So I definitely could see the Eagles and putting up points early in this matchup. And unless Goddard finds the end zone early in the first half, he's likely not going to get a lot of opportunities in the second half of this game. My other tight ends, the rookie tight end for Los Angeles, who's definitely hit that rookie wall. He's actually popped up on these lists multiple times over the last month or so, and it's just maybe he's hitting a rookie wall or he's just getting these tough matchups. But I don't like Oronde Gadsden the second against the Chiefs this weekend. The Chiefs have allowed the 5th fewest points per game against tight ends this season. When you look at their last 4 games, only one tight end finished over 40 receiving yards against them. They've only given up 1 tight end touchdowns in those 4 games, as well as just only 3 tight end touchdowns for the entire season. So while Gadsden was a good streaming option at the middle part of the year, I'd be looking to stream maybe a Theo Johnson over a Oronde Gadsden this week. So yeah, that wraps up my top starts and sits for week 15 of this NFL season. As always, if you did enjoy today's video, please make sure you do hit that like button. If you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, make sure you hit subscribe. Follow me on all my social media platforms. I'm on X, TikTok, and Instagram. I wish you guys all the luck. I hope you guys are back with me next week, because that means you won the first round, or you do have a first round bye, and that's why you're back next week. I'll talk to you then. Peace out.